This, to me, has long been the hardest one to understand, mainly just because it's kind of a head scratcher. And as I was preparing for today, I read several different takes on this parable, and all of them said the same thing, that this is the hardest one to interpret. And there are different reasons for that. We'll go into a couple of those. Part of it, though, is what Jesus says. If we just kind of glance at it superficially, as we are prone sometimes to mistakenly do, then we look at that and go, wait, is he telling us to do the wrong thing? Because Jesus wouldn't tell us to do the wrong thing, but it almost sounds on the surface like he might be telling us to do the wrong thing and to be more like this heathen guy in the parable. So it leaves us a little bit confused. I'll try to unmuddy some of the water, okay? I really do think part of it is just our approach. And then I think part of it is just hard because of a couple of characteristics that are different about this parable from some others. Okay, so y'all know at the beginning of this series, those of you that were here, that I gave you some really simple guidelines for interpreting parables. If you use the YouVersion app, it is working, the last I checked. I got up early this morning. I always do this on Sunday morning, so the outline's kind of refreshed in my mind. I got on there, did the YouVersion thing. I went to click the little button that said publish, and right before I did, the website went blank. It kind of auto-saves and reloads every now and then, and it went blank. And it signed me out. And then it told me that my password was not really my password. And what happened was YouVersion went down globally for a little while this morning, everywhere. And so it just, it wasn't really submitting my password, and it was running into all these errors, blah, 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 blah. And I was kind of frustrated. I had worked on this for quite a while and done all this work to make sure that was there this morning, because this is why I'm going to this, in that YouVersion thing is those guidelines. Every week I've included that just as a little reminder so you can look at that little list and kind of have that handy. So I did all of that, and it was just gone. And you know what my first thought was this morning? I shouldn't have done that. I could have made an omelet if it wasn't going to actually be there. I could have had bacon, I gave up my bacon for this. Anyway, it came back on, so it was worth it. But there for a while, I really was rather having bacon. You can find that. Among those rules, the very first one that I have in there, and they're not in any sort of an order beyond, that's the order I put them in. But kind of the first of importance really is this one in terms of the first step, and that is context. You look at the context of the parable, because who he's talking to, whatever kind of interaction they've been having before that, it all helps you understand the parable. For example, we looked last week, I think it was, or the week before, at Luke 15 and the lost parables, the lost coin, lost sheep, and the prodigal son. You understand the parable of the prodigal son much better when you understand who he was talking to. He was talking to a crowd that represented the older brother in the parable. That's who was there. It's who he was telling the story to. He was saying, you guys, you're the older brother, and you need to do better. Okay? That context helps you understand that. The one that we come to this morning, we don't have any. There's none. We just start with the text, and Luke gives us nothing. He's already been teaching, but at this point he doesn't say, and he continued. He just says, and he told him this parable, which, as Luke writes, if he doesn't give us any timing detail, could mean he told him that parable the next day. I mean, it was sometime in that week, so it's while he's teaching in this area. We kind of know the general setting, but we don't know. Was it still in the same conversation? Had he moved on? Was it at dinner that night? What, breakfast the next morning? We know nothing. We just have the parable. That's it. So that makes it a little bit tougher. So we're not going to do context today because we got none. So let's read this. And then you'll know what I'm talking about and why it's hard, okay? If you're not familiar. This is going to be from the NIV. Jesus told his disciples there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer." Somebody's in trouble, right? This much we know, somebody's in trouble. The manager said to himself, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig." I love that he's this honest about himself, right? I can't go do a real job with arms and muscles. I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. Immediately his mind goes to, I got to land. And where am I going to land? Then he called in each of his master's debtors. He asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. That's a lot. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, "And how much do you owe?" 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, "Take your bill and make it 800. The master commended, and this is where we go crazy, right? The master comes in and commends the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. And the way I think and the way I see things, maybe the way you think and the way you see things, unless you're some kind of a heathen liar too, is that you look at this and go, but that's not right. Why would he do that? We'll get into that. But already, my brain hangs on that. And I go, well, wait a minute. Why would he commend him? For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing, this is Jesus talking now, for the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. And if we read that wrong, then we think, wait, so Jesus is saying, and some of yours won't say worldly wealth, it'll say unrighteous. Use worldly wealth to win friends? Like Jesus wants us to go out and use money, maybe even dirty money, to go and win people over and to make friends? This doesn't sound like Jesus. This is Jesus who corrected Zacchaeus. We don't even know what he said to him, but he corrected Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus went and made everything right. That's the Jesus we know. We know Jesus as the Son of God, the same God who, when he gave the law to Moses, told him that if you so much as have a dishonest scale, your relationship with God is in jeopardy. God does not like dishonesty. He doesn't like bad business. He doesn't like people who skim off the top. That is as wrong as you think it is and assume it is, based on everything he ever taught you on integrity and honesty and being right and greed. So what in the world is Jesus saying? You ought to be more like that guy. That lying scalawag, you ought to learn from him. Why? And I know you're sitting there going, well, James, you can't ask Jesus why. I'm asking why. He knows me, okay? He knows this about me. I'm asking why. He's been putting up with it for nearly 51 years. Good grief. Why? This is what he says, verse 10. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. This goes through my mind all the time, this passage. That passage I get. It's why I don't like the first part. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will be dishonest with much. Okay, then why did you tell me to be like this dishonest guy? We'll get there. I'm just going to keep the pot stirred. So, if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Uh-oh. Did you catch Jesus' little zing right there? If you hadn't been good with money, that just the stuff flowing through an economy that by its nature is corrupt, okay? We know that. Our world is full of corruption. Our economy is full of corruption. Our government is full of corruption. But Jesus' point is, and so are you, okay? And if you haven't been trustworthy because you're living just like everybody else in this corrupt world, you can't even do well with that. Why would I give you something more valuable? It's a zing, isn't it? There's some sting to this statement from Jesus. Verse 12, and if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? Generally, people of good integrity take better care. I realize rent car companies are like, oh, no, they don't. But that's because a lot of those people are not people of good integrity when they get in that car. Depends on who's in the driver's seat. People of good integrity take better care of other people's things than they take of their own, because that's an extension of the golden rule. How you treat other people's things is how you treat other people. Okay? So it matters there's a little side lesson. It matters how you treat other people's belongings. It matters how you treat the rental car as a Christian. It matters how you don't tear up a hotel room as a Christian. It matters how you leave the table when you leave the restaurant as a Christian. Our faith is supposed to touch everything. He says, and if you can't even leave the table right, if you can't even tip well, what makes you think I'm going to trust you with anything any more important than that? There's some zing there. Let's keep going. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other, but you can't serve both God and money. The Pharisees, who loved money, heard all of this. We do get this much context. The Pharisees, who loved money, heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. And he said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God, He knows your hearts." What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. Now, what I like about the ending of this, and it's hard, what I like about the ending of this is that then I know that misreading we can have of the parable itself is a misreading. Because the misreading would be to become like the people he's condemning here in the last statement. Okay, the overhearers, those people, we don't know the setting. Maybe at the temple, maybe at a dinner, maybe just wherever, Solomon's portico, we don't know. Wherever they were, these guys overhear it and they start knocking him. And he says, you're only knocking me because your hearts are in the wrong place. You're chasing after everything that God told you was dust. And it's not right. Okay, so we at least have that much. But overall, the context question is hard, and it does make it a little bit harder to figure out this puzzle of this parable. Okay, then if I'm supposed to be like that, how again am I supposed to be like this guy who sounds more like the people you just condemned at the end? How in the world is that supposed to work? This guy, we wouldn't hire him, would we? I would hope not. We wouldn't hire him. Although he did what he did because he knows that the other corrupt people in town will hire him because they've seen that his corruption worked to their advantage. That's how systems become so out of whack. Corrupt people hire corrupt people to work more corruption in their advantage. And what Jesus says is, you ought to be more like those people. And that messes with our heads because he's not saying you should be corrupt. But he is saying, maybe you ought to think about working the system to kingdom advantage the same way they're working the system to their kingdom's advantage. We'll get into that a little bit more. First, we don't have context. That makes it hard. Second, we have the uncomfortable ending, and that makes it hard. Be like that guy. We don't like that. It makes no sense to us. So we just don't know what to do with it. And because we don't know what to do with it, you know what we usually do? We don't do anything with it. We skip over this and we go, Luke 16 also has that parable about that guy, may not even be a parable, that parable about that poor guy who died out there on the porch and the rich man then went to hell. And what do we do with that one? Because we're far more comfortable with rich men going to hell than actually becoming like them, right? That's what, there you are. There's part of our problem probably. Maybe a little bit of our context even, if we were to keep reading that far. It's tough. So why is he commended by the master? Why is he commended by Jesus in a way? Why? There are three different takes generally among interpreters on what this may be about. And this gives us some historical context of the way that business worked at the time so that we can kind of get, so let's make sense of this a little bit, even if we don't know exactly what's going on. One of those is this. The master was breaking the law of Moses. When you loaned people money, this is something we know from history that looks like what might have been happening in this story. According to the law of Moses, when you made a loan, you were not allowed to charge interest. Okay? That's the principle given by God. When you loan, you don't charge interest. So when they say that the American economy is built on Judeo-Christian principles, they lie. Okay? They lie. By they, I mean we. We lie. No, it's not. Or we wouldn't have a Federal Reserve. I know some of you are like, that's right, we ain't need no Federal Reserve. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is that the whole interest system was against the law of Moses. And so they could, when they charged interest, they were breaking the law. But here's the loophole they found. So this manager and his boss apparently had been making loans, possibly. This is a possible interpretation. They had been making loans, and since they couldn't charge interest, that was against the law of Moses. What they would do is make the loan. They would convert this loan from money into goods. They would do loans in kind. Technically, they figured, we can't charge interest on it because it's not money. So instead, we add on to the in kind. You will pay us back. You won't pay us back in money because we can't charge interest. But we will do the monetary equivalent of what the loan was for, and then it's not interest. It's not interest. It's repayment in kind. We will buy back your wheat or your olive oil at a reduced rate, meaning you owe us more wheat or olive oil than was worth that. So you borrowed $5. You need to sell me back $10 worth of wheat, for which I will give you $5 worth of credit, and then there was no interest because you only paid me back $5 worth of credit. I just gave you a poor rate on the wheat. You know what we call those? Airport money exchange places, because that is exactly how they work, right? They don't charge a fee. They just have one rate when the money comes in as dollars and another rate when you bring back your rubles or whatever and have to change it back, and somehow it doesn't equal the dollars that you traded in, right? Somehow that little magic worked, and so that's what happens. The same kind of an idea. And they thought they'd found a loophole, and it wasn't really a loophole. God knows better than this, but that's what they tried. So that's one thing. In which case, by the way, and it was up there if you read it, the master would not be able to prosecute the manager, and so maybe he's commending him, saying, "Man, that was pretty slick." Because if that's the case, what the manager did was he took that in-kind increase, removed it, and allowed the customer, the debtor, to pay back at the correct amount of money, which was awesome for them, so they're happy with him. They'll do business with him, maybe even hire him. But the manager or the master is also looking at that and going, "Man, you outwitted me. Good move." Because it is true that in the world, shrewd people admire shrewd people even when they're enemies. Newt Gingrich used to say very high compliments about Bill Clinton's political skill. They can't stand each other, okay? But they admired one another's skill. That skill's going to get them in trouble, but they admired it, right? Okay. Second, that really does fit with the parable, doesn't it? Anyway, 3 takes. The second one, the manager had been skimming off more from the top. The way he made his money was through a commission. So when he adjusted those debts so that they would have to pay back more, like in the first possibility, when they did that, he would, rightly so, this was part of his job, he would build in his commission. But just as Zacchaeus said, "If I've done this, I repent and I'll pay it back 4 times," this guy may have been padding his own stuff. And so he was skimming off the top, getting a few kickbacks here and there from the farmers. Another writer said, it's even known that sometimes what they would do is they would give the debt to this person would then pass on the debt to a subletter. They would make money from him. He would make money to the manager, and the manager would then not give that to the master, and that's why he was in trouble. Maybe, it all sounds like Wall Street, doesn't it? It sounds like ERCOT. It sounds like a lot of things in our news, doesn't it? But that's what was happening. And since people were getting a break, they're happy with him. And again, the master can't say anything if this is the case either, because really he's kind of made everybody happier with everybody, so good move, okay, is what the master is saying. And it may be both. That's the other, some say, it really could just be both, because things did get that bad sometimes, and that also is quite possible. But in the end, is Jesus really wanting us to be not only this corrupt, but this complicated in our corruption? Is this what's going on? Does that sound like Jesus? No. I think sometimes we can be, I don't know what the right word is. Naive is not really the right word, because it's not necessarily not out of naivete. Sometimes it's out of being well-principled. It's not like you're ignorant, but maybe you just have that strong a conviction level that you don't even allow yourself to be shrewd in ways that are not wrong and are not corrupt and are not bad because, well, that's just a bit too ba-da-da-da-da. And that's a technical term, ba-da-da-da-da. It's just a little bit too much of that. And so you just end up not being all that, the phrase here, street smart, right? You're too good to take advantage of some of the things that go on in the world and the system and the way it works, and so you just don't take advantage of that. Maybe you don't want to be a part of certain things. They have, with mutual funds, there are the Baptist mutual funds and the Church of Christ mutual funds. Those are mutual funds that don't have things in them that would go against our convictions, that don't support certain types of business. And so, if you go to financial planner, they might say, well, I kind of keep this one over here. This is kind of the Church of Christ fund. And it's just, I know there's nothing there that's generally going to bother you guys. And so you don't get some of the financial, profit that you might get from another mutual fund that does invest in things that are growing quickly, but are growing from sin. And so you end up not getting all that advantage. He says sometimes that happens, and it can even happen to the point that it comes sometimes to our detriment. I think it helps to read this in the Message. It's just a paraphrase. I kind of think of the Message as a commentary because Eugene Peterson was a linguistic expert. He's really good at the Greek and Hebrew. And he wrote this to actually just for his Sunday school class. The Message was written for his Sunday school class so that they could better understand in their own language, kind of vernacular, the Scripture. And I just treat it like a commentary. This is the way he interprets verses 8 and 9. Now here's a surprise. The master praised the crooked manager. And why? Because he knew how to look after himself. Streetwise people are smarter in this regard than law-abiding citizens. They are on constant alert, looking at angles, surviving by their wits. I want you to be smart in the same way, but for what is right, using every adversity to stimulate you to creative survival, to concentrate your attention on the bare essentials so you'll live, really live, and not complacently just get by on good behavior. It's really a good take on it, and I think it's kind of a take, okay, more than a translation. But the way he reads this and explains it is that sometimes when we're good people and law-abiding people, we let our guard down a little bit, and we're just not thinking ahead far enough. We start to think, might be the way I would put it, we start to think, well, it's all going to work out. How do we word that? Romans 8, God works all things together for the good of those who love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. I don't have to do anything. God's just going to work it out. He's going to work it out. It'll be fine, right? It'll be fine. And he says, the world's smarter than that. I said, but I quoted Romans 8. Yeah, but the world's smarter than the way you're applying it. God does work all things together for good of those who love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. He works best through those who are called according to His, what again? Purpose. Called. Called is the word I'm looking for. Called to what? Action. Not called to sit-ins. Called to action. God works with is the Greek language. I talked to you all about that a few weeks ago. He doesn't just work it out in spite of us. He works it out with us. The Old Revised Standard says that. God works with those who love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. So you need to open your eyes up and start looking and seeing how, in my current circumstances and with my current resources, and looking at the way that things are going. In our prayer earlier, it was mentioned that a lot of people are astray. They're turning their backs on the Lord. Okay, open more than just your mouth in prayer and start asking, Lord, what can I do with what I have where I am to influence people actively, not just sitting there and saying, Lord, you called me. Can you rub off something on them? That's not what He's saying. You teach, you preach, you serve, you love, you help, you do everything you can to help this person come to know Jesus and to get their life back in line with the Lord. Okay? Actively pursuing, not complacently just saying, well, the Lord will work it all out. Okay? Don't be complacent in your faith is what jumped out at him as he was looking over that passage. Second, they use their resources to advance their causes more effectively. Look at the world. Look at the way things are changing in our country and in our society. Is that happening by accident? Is that really just drift? Or are there people actively, openly pushing various agendas? I'm not thinking of any even in particular, because there are dozens. They are actively pursuing it. They are putting their money toward it. They are putting their votes toward it. They are putting their principles toward it. They are teaching and recruiting and everything else. Everything Christians are supposed to be doing, they're doing for darkness. He says, guys, you salt and light people, you got to be brighter than that. You got to be smarter than that. You've got to have more influence than that. What are you doing to influence the world? Because they're going to do it. If you're complacent and we sit still, the world goes to them. The world goes to them. Your children and your grandchildren go to them. Because they're working hard. Are we? And this is one of the things I think that he's getting at. They're doing that better. You ought to work as hard as they do. You know how we'll have the saying sometimes when we see somebody who's been a very inventive crook? Hackers kind of strike me this way. When hackers realize that all this new security software spots very quickly large amounts of money being removed from accounts that would be outside of a pattern, they started going with taking out 27 cents here, $1.30 there, really tiny amounts. But they've stolen billions and billions of dollars, tiny amounts at a time. And you think, that's like the master commended the servant. That's pretty smart. It's crooked as all get out. It's wrong. Children, don't be going there. But was it smart? Is this what Jesus is talking? Yes. He's saying, could you be as creative for righteousness and justice as they're being for unrighteousness and injustice? Could you be as wise, as creative, as proactive and aggressive for good as they are for evil? That's what he's getting at with the parable. When that finally kind of, maybe you knew this all along, I don't know. But that just kind of, I finally get it now. That makes sense. And then you go, oh, but that's a to-do list. Yes, it is. This is what he's getting at, isn't it? And he's saying, and I'm not going to trust you with more until you take what little I've given you now and go do something with that. That was how he ended it, right? Dave All put it this way. He said, Jesus is basically saying, even the crooks of the world know that money is a tool and not an end in itself. Why can't you people of faith understand that? Use your resources, whatever they are, and even the resources of others to benefit those in need, and you will be rewarded at the final judgment. This is what he's getting at. How can you use all those resources that you're a part of? How can you use even the things that come from where you work and what you do and the doors that opens to do good, to do justice, to do righteousness? And you may catch that I keep using this word justice and righteousness interchangeably. That's because in both the Greek and in the Hebrew, they are the same word. So closely related that when you, I thought I had my little thumb thing there timed just right. That when you go to Matthew chapter 5, verse 6, this is the New Living Translation, which is not related to the Old Living Bible. Really good modern translation that's rising up in popularity big time. God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice. You're going, well, now my King James says righteousness. Yes, it does. They're the same thing. Completely interchangeable. But it changes how we perceive it, doesn't it? Because when we think righteous, we think, oh, that's about me. That's all about me. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst that I will be righteous before God. I want to be so right with the Lord. And this isn't what it's about. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. How would we word that another way? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst. Let's use a Jesus phrase. That things will be on earth as they are in heaven. That's justice. That's righteousness. On earth as it is in heaven. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for that, for they will be satisfied. That's our ministry. That's our calling. That's who we are. That's how we use what He's given us. We don't just sit around and think, oh, it'll be nice to be retired someday. No, you say, what am I going to do so that as I get down to even the last part of my wick, it is the light of the kingdom of God that is shown through my life, that bears influence on the people around me and guides people to Jesus. What am I going to do to see justice done? To see the poor served, the hungry fed, the naked clothed, the orphan housed? What am I going to do? Not just what am I going to pray about. What am I going to do? Because God intends to work with those who are called, those who love the Lord and are called according to His purpose, with us, through us. So a lady named Sister Schubert. Y'all like a good hot roll? Because it's nearly time. Sister Schubert hot rolls. You see them in the frozen section. I get no pay for this. Frozen section at United over there. I used to eat them. Actually, I looked up the carb count today. It's really not that bad. So I may be wanting those this week. By the way, you put enough butter on there, them carbs go. Did you know butter melts carbs? Goes away. Just like that. I know, I've done an experiment, and I cannot eat the rolls at section hand without butter. My glucose goes up. If I pile on the butter, do you know what happens? The Lord just evens them all right out. It's awesome. It's awesome. It's just, in fact, I'm having a roll at lunch. Okay, I got distracted. Sister Schubert and her rolls. So, you know her. She has these rolls, and it's her grandmother's recipe. And she looked at that recipe. She was doing a catering thing, and the rolls were very popular. Okay? And she decided, I've been given this recipe by my grandmother. I could do something with this. And she starts a business just on the rolls, which is now the big business. Nationwide, you can go in the store and you can buy these rolls. But it didn't stop there. What she did with that recipe was build an entire company, shrewd management of her resources. Just a recipe. It's just a recipe. You might be sitting there right now going, I don't have anything. You might have a recipe. She starts a whole company based on the recipe for the rolls. Makes a really good living. Adopts a child from Ukraine. Then decides that's not enough. Starts regular contributions, becomes a benefactor through that company, uses the resources she's given to bless the orphanage that he came from, which now bears his name. It's called Sasha's house. His name was Alexei. Alexei and Sasha, it's like a nickname, Sasha of Alexei. And I know that doesn't fit, but that's the way they work it. And so Sasha's house in Ukraine is a children's home. Have no idea how things are going right now for that. That's probably something to be praying about. Is blessed because she took a recipe and said, I want to bless the world somehow. Builds a business, uses that shrewdly to do that. And now children are blessed daily through something as simple as a yeast roll recipe. And this is what I think Jesus is getting at. He says, what have you got? I just got 2 loaves and 5 fish. Or 5, I forget. Is it 2 loaves and 5 fish or 5? It doesn't matter. I got a couple of cans of herring and some Sister Schubert rolls. Okay? What are you going to do with that? I was really not going to mention herring this week. I promised Sebia, but it just happened. And what are you going to do with that? What did Jesus do with it? Jesus is just saying, don't be lazy and sit back and just expect me to just go boom, boom, boom each time. Take what you've got and use that in a way that builds up the kingdom of God. Let people benefit from that around you. Maybe it is an orphanage. Maybe it's the Lubbock Children's Home that we'll hear about, or y'all will hear about here in a couple of weeks. Maybe it's Foster's Home over in Stephenville, wonderful ministry over there. Maybe it's Cisco Camp that blesses children all summer. Whatever. What are you doing? And how can we do more and do more wisely and plan for the future, that this church is a blessing for generations to come and that people's lives and eternities are changed? That's what I think he's getting at with this really difficult parable. Okay? Let's pray together.